You hear all the time how inexpensive the housing is in places like Houston, Texas. But if it's a city where it's basically impossible to get around without owning a car, then is it really that cheap to live there? Well, today we're going to talk about how car dependency changes the equation when we talk about the combined cost of housing and transportation. I'm going to tell you how I think about it and analyze it. And we're going to count down the 10 cities where housing and transportation eat up the most of your budget. And it's all coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer suggested topics always welcome, and here's a tweet that responded to my recent video on the most affordable cities for minimum wage workers. CityNerd, can we get something like this but for housing plus transportation? From someone frustrated that his city gets labeled affordable when its housing plus transportation are the same as New York City. So I always say this is a channel about cities and transportation, and the question of affordability isn't just about being able to pay rent or mortgage. It's definitely about transportation too. Those are, after all, the two biggest expenditures for the typical US household, and they're two things that are very intertwined. And look, I talk about various aspects of affordability on this channel a lot because I really think it goes to the heart of why urbanism is so prominent in the zeitgeist these days. People want to be able to live in cities where they can walk, roll, bike, and take transit to meet their daily needs and avoid the expense and hassle of owning a car. But what I haven't talked about yet on this channel is the concept of location efficiency, which essentially means that if you live in a location that lets you economize on other costs, transportation in particular, you can actually justify spending more of your budget on housing, including sometimes qualifying for a bigger mortgage. Okay, let's talk about how I analyze this one because I really do like asking questions that I don't know what the answers are actually going to be until I research it. And this is definitely one that kept me in suspense because I genuinely had no idea what I was going to find. First, I don't want to talk about college towns or obscure suburbs today. So my threshold for what I looked at is central cities over 200,000, in a metro area over 1 million. Housing, I'm going with the median priced apartment that was listed in October 2023 for each city, according to the enormous data set I got from Dwellsy, and thanks to them as usual. Previously, I've used price per square foot, but today I'm talking about the median household in each city, so I really just want the median priced apartment. Transportation, I wanted to figure out how many motor vehicles the typical household in each city has. So I looked at the distribution of the number of vehicles available per household and did a weighted average. Not a median, which would be too coarse for what I need. And what I did probably undercounts slightly because I just counted the 3 or more category as 3 vehicles. The next piece of math is to multiply that number by the annual cost of vehicle ownership. I went ahead and grabbed the 2023 number from the American Automobile Association, which at a little over $12,000 is pretty consistent with the number I came up with for my cost of car ownership video last year. I didn't bother considering transportation costs for households with no vehicle ownership. The cost of transit passes is trivial in comparison, especially in the cities where there are more significant numbers of car-free households, where driving is even more expensive. If you've ever tried to park a car in Manhattan, you know what I'm talking about. And I know I'm going to get comments from extremely intelligent people who point out that if you walk or bike, you have to replace your shoes more often, or you have to eat more because you're burning more calories. Just stop it. And the third piece I wanted to include here was median household income. This is because the local economy in so many of our cities can be so radically different. Yes, housing is cheaper in Tulsa than it is in San Francisco, but the prevailing wages are so much higher in the Bay Area. Just a note on the census data. For both vehicle ownership and household income, I used 2022 American Community Survey 1-year estimates. Normally I like to use the 5-year rolling because it's more statistically significant, but for this topic, recency is really important because the economy and housing costs feel pretty radically different from what they did 5 years ago. So that's it. I realize there are a lot of nuances I can get into around how the cost of living varies from city to city, or taxes, but I always want to err on the side of keeping things straightforward enough to summarize in a sentence or a question. And that question is, what percentage of a city's median household income does it take to afford a median rental and median car ownership in that city? And these are going to be the 10 worst because I'm just in that kind of mood today, so let's get into it. Number 10, Buffalo, New York. 71% of the median household income spent on housing and transportation. So, spoiler alert, there are going to be cities on this list that also appeared in my list of the 10 most undervalued cities. These are going to be cities where prevailing rents are reasonable, the urbanism is okay, but the median household income is significantly lower than the national number, and car ownership levels are still higher than you'd want to see. Like, just because your downtown has a good walk score doesn't mean people in your city are actually walking. Number 9, let's go about as opposite of Buffalo as we can get, Los Angeles. Above average median household income, but cities that are car dependent and have expensive housing are not going to fare well in this analysis. I mean, isn't the whole point of living in a big expensive city that you're going to be able to economize on transportation? In a recent video, I mentioned the 30% rule of how much you should be spending on housing, and some people say you should spend 15% on transportation, or there's another rule of thumb that you can spend 50% of your income on combined housing and transportation. Well, big modern cities are supposed to help you keep that transportation number low, but LA, like every city on this list, is going to be over 70% combined. Number 8, San Antonio. So a simple way of looking at this is, there are 3 ways a city can get on this list. High housing prices, high levels of vehicle ownership, and low median incomes. Honestly, it's usually a combination, but we've already seen 3 very different cities on this list. San Antonio is car dependent. Incomes aren't that high, and the median apartment is still over $1,500 a month. Can I just pause to point out that if you own 2 cars, AAA is saying you're paying over $2,000 a month for the privilege. It's just incredible the proportion of their income the median household spends on car ownership. You know how much I spend? 0. And now you know how I'm able to pay the bills with weekly YouTube videos of dubious quality. Number 7, Memphis, Tennessee. So unfortunately, car-dependent cities with low median incomes are going to be a theme here. These are cities that are just tough on you if you don't make much money. The housing prices aren't that bad, but the cost of car ownership is simply going to grind you down. Keep in mind, the numbers I'm showing you are what's actually happening in the city in question, in the aggregate, and individual results are going to vary a lot. If you're fortunate enough to make an above average income and you yourself can function car-free or car-light, a lot of the cities I'm talking about here can actually be a good value. Let's stick with that theme for number 6, Cincinnati. It just gives me indescribable pain to see this city on this list. I mean, the numbers are the numbers, but there's a huge irony here, which is that the most recognizably Cincinnati parts of Cincinnati are the parts that existed long before people even imagined owning personal motor vehicles, let alone multiple of them. Cincinnati was literally designed so that you could live without a car because cars didn't exist when Cincinnati took shape. It's kind of infuriating if you think about it too much. Okay, let's go to a very different kind of city, and I use that word loosely. San Bernardino, California. Average household owns 2.27 vehicles. Very cool and normal. That translates to around $28,000 a year on a $63,000 median income. And the crazy thing is, I guarantee the median household doesn't think they're paying that much. I really do think the vehicle ownership model is designed to keep you from thinking too much about what you're actually paying. That's your conspiracy theory for this week. Okay, and I know I spent a lot of time talking about the Inland Empire last week, but when I originally conceived the idea for this video, I wanted to include all cities over 200,000 population, whether they were central cities or not, but it quickly became apparent that the rental market in suburbs is just too wonky or sometimes barely even exists at all. But I will give you the 2 US cities over 200K with the highest levels of vehicle ownership, and those are Fontana and Moreno Valley, California, both also in the Inland Empire. Can we just build more transit and dense housing in LA so people don't have to live out here and spend all their time and money on driving? Does anyone actually enjoy living like that? Okay, ready for some whiplash? Number 4 is New York. This one makes me sad because I really wanted the person who tweeted at me to be right, but the median rental unit that was on the market in the data I have was $4,500. I always like to back check this stuff when I get a shocking number, but when I Google this, I get answers that are all over the map. To be fair, the New York City rental market is both confusing and insane. There are broker's fees, there are huge lines at open houses for ruinously expensive expensive shoe boxes. And to be clear, all this does vary by borough, but overall, incomes are above average, and New York does have by far the lowest car ownership rates in the US, but the apartment scene is just wild. Okay, in a minute I'm gonna get to the 3 cities where it's the most difficult to live in a location-efficient manner, and that includes number 1 that I do not think you're gonna see coming. A city where the median household spends roughly 100% of its income on housing and transportation. Seems bad. But first, brief reminder to click on all the stuff. Unnamed sources tell me the notification bell is by far the most helpful. Connect on all the usual websites, and direct support on Patreon is cool. Oh, and I do have merch for the holidays, so check out the link to the store down in the description if you're interested. Dishonorable mentions, just the Inland Empire in its entirety, that's all. Honorable mentions, the cities where the median household spends the least proportion of its income on housing and transportation. It is a fascinating list, but I'm gonna save it for a whole other video, maybe even next week if the mood strikes. Let's go to number 3, another one that just pains me. Cleveland. Still lots of good pre-automobile urban fabric intact. Prevailing rents are pretty low, and vehicle ownership honestly just isn't that high by US standards, but a median household income under $40,000. So this is another city where if you're lucky enough to be earning above the median, or if you have like a trust fund or something, your money can go a very long way. And I'm certainly not gonna dunk on cities for having lots of poor people. Man, I owe Cleveland a visit. Number 2, an even more pronounced example of the same dynamic, Detroit. Another US city that developed largely before the advent of the personal motor vehicle, but this one is just brutal. It is the birthplace of the mass-produced automobile, and now that invention is just a destructive albatross for the people who have to navigate the city. Again, this is all a different story if you yourself make more than the median income and you can pick your spots, but I'm just showing you what's actually happening in these cities for the median resident. And number 1, the city where the median household essentially spends everything on housing and transportation, with nothing left over for all the high-end restaurants and luxury retailers, Miami, Florida. Median rental unit on the market is $3,300 a month. Typical household still has 1.5 cars, but the median income is below the national average. It just doesn't all add up. And look, I like Miami. I enjoyed visiting this year, even in July, but the whole theme of that video was that the city is walkable urbanism for the rich and car dependency for the masses, and unfortunately, it looks like the numbers bear that out. Dishonorable mention, my city over 200K, irrespective of being a suburb or not, that's actually worse than Miami is Hialeah, right next door. It's especially hard to understand why you would put yourself through financial torture to stay in the place that's probably gonna fare just about the worst when climate change really starts kicking in. And I understand this is tough. People don't always have a choice in where they can live because of family or friends or a particular job, or they just have a strong identification with the place they're from. But it is hard to see how we're gonna keep South Florida livable in the coming decades. Like, we still mine hundreds of millions of tons of coal in this country every year, and it's kind of outside the scope of this channel, but that is fascinating to me, politically for sure, but also I am very much a nerd for logistics, and there is a new installment of Wendiver's The Logistics of X series on coal mining. There's stuff in here I knew before, like what a huge proportion of current US coal production originates from a patch of land in northeast Wyoming, but a lot of stuff I didn't know, like how modern extraction techniques work, which is super interesting. And look, coal mining is kinda unsavory however you slice it, but I do like understanding the reality of the things that are actually happening in the world, even if I don't think they're good things, and Wendiver, as always, breaks all this stuff down beautifully. The Logistics of Coal Mining is a Nebula original and exclusive to the platform, and it's a great example of the way Nebula supports creators in branching out and producing content to a higher level of finish. You know, I joined Nebula at the beginning of this year, and it's hard for me to even express what it's meant to the growth and development of what I'm doing. I joined in part to diversify the outlets where my content appears, but what's turned out to be even more important is it's given me the opportunity to learn from all the other great creators on the platform and find find ways to keep improving what I'm doing. Remember, Nebula is creator owned, so everyone you see on Nebula has a direct stake in the success of the platform. That's why I always say that when you sign up, you're really helping support all of us financially, professionally, and creatively in a long-term structural way. But none of it really works unless we keep making the platform better. So every month we're adding more creators, so the library of content keeps growing. So look, not only is the platform itself better than it was last month, or the month before that, or the month before that, this month is the ideal time to sign up for a Nebula membership because this holiday season, lifetime memberships are back for a limited time. The deal is, it's $300. You pay once, and then you have Nebula for as long as both you and Nebula exist. As always, consult your preferred actuarial table to find out if it pencils out for you. But it is an amazing way to support a creator-owned platform and this channel in particular. In 2024, Nebula is investing in more big concept originals, which means they're going to be able to greenlight more stuff, maybe even something from me one day, if I can ever manage to put a decent pitch together. Also for the holidays, you can even gift a lifetime membership. Like, do you ever give a quote-unquote gift to someone else in your household that's actually something you want? Maybe that's just me and I'm a bad person, but I'm just putting that out there. One other thing, if you have the old Curiosity Stream bundle and you renewed in 2023, you will get access to Nebula until the end of your 12-month subscription period. But that bundle is ending, and Nebula creators won't be getting any revenue from that bundle in 2024. So the only way to get Nebula access and support its creators directly in 2024 is by signing up directly. So if you're on that bundle and you want to switch over, you can sign up and pay today for the limited lifetime or the usual annual or monthly options, and the clock won't start on your new Nebula subscription until your bundle expires. And for those of you who are already Nebula members, a massive thanks from me, although you should probably be watching this video on Nebula, where it appears ad-free and without this promo in it. And that's all I got. Thanks for joining today. And thanks as always to the patrons, whose direct support continues to make doing this channel a viable job, and even a modestly enjoyable one. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.